Congressional Director for the Republican Leader of the State Assembly, James Kadisco. First, thank you all for taking the time to come out to this informational meeting on the budget for New York State, on the proposed budget for New York State. Also, thank you to Marist College, Tim Massey, the Public Information Officer for Marist, as well as Bob Lynch, Director of Student Activities, for your hospitality. Tonight we're going to hear from 4 members of the New York State Assembly, as well as staff members from the Assembly Ways and Means Committee. Assemblyman Mike Spano represents the 93rd Assembly District located in the city of Yonkers. Assemblyman Spano was first elected to the Assembly in 1992 and served for over a decade. After a brief hiatus from the Assembly to spend time with his young family, Assemblyman Spano was elected once again to his current seat in the Assembly. He serves on 6 committees, including the Committee on Cities and Education. Assemblyman Greg Wall represents the 99th Assembly District, including parts of northern Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess counties. Assemblyman Wall is in his first term and serves on 4 committees, and he is a ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Assemblyman Joel Miller represents the 102nd District in the Assembly, including parts of Dutchess County, as well as the town of Poughkeepsie, right here at Marist College. Assemblyman Miller is in his 7th term, serves on 4 committees, and was recently appointed to the Joint Legislative Committee on Homeland Security. Assemblyman Mark Molinaro represents the 103rd District in the Assembly, including parts of both Dutchess and Columbia counties. Assemblyman Molinaro is in his first term, serves on 4 committees, including Children and Families Committee, and is the ranking member on both Government Operations and Libraries and Education Technology Committees. Please welcome all 4 members. We also have with us staff from the Ways and Means Committee of the Assembly. The Ways and Means Committee is the committee primarily responsible for budget analysis and helps determine the fiscal impact on all measures brought before the Assembly. Lauren O'Hare is here to discuss with us local government assistance issues, real property tax, education funding issues, taxes in general, and the budget surplus. Ed Golden is here to discuss health care issues, and specifically the bottle bill. Dave Young is here to discuss higher education, economic development, public safety issues, and will give a general overview of the budget timeline and the budget process. The way this will proceed is that these 3 individuals will give brief presentations to topics I outlined. Please feel free to follow along in the handouts that are on the front table. If you don't have one, please feel free to grab one now. At the end of the presentations, the members will have time to comment. And after that, we'll have time for question and answers. We just ask that you keep your questions restricted to issues about the New York State budget. Thank you.
Thank you. The topics of interest looking at the audience should be ones that we have some expertise on. I'm the ranking member on the Committee of Higher Education. I serve on the Education Committee. I also serve on the Health Committee. These are areas significantly impacted in the budget now. You can see the pile over there, which actually represents the governor's budget, which we managed to condense into a few flip pages. So there are things important and things not so important. Let me just allay your fears about this being a political presentation. For the past 12 years, of course, we've had a Republican governor. This year, we have a Democratic governor. I can assure you that members on both sides of the aisle look with the same anticipation that the community does for reform in all of the aspects of Albany that need reform. And in fact, that Eliot Spitzer got the mandate that he got in no way indicates a lack of Republican support for that governor. We are hoping that we are able to move forward in a bipartisan way to do everything possible to improve the lot of all of the people in the state of New York. That, in fact, is our job, and it supersedes anything political. Where, just for some humorous interlude, we may make some snide comments here or there, but they're strictly for the purpose of comedic relief. I can assure you that we all share an interest in finally reaching the very best budget that we can. In order to do that, I think it's important for you to understand what the budget process is and why, in fact, this is the governor's budget that we will be presenting tonight. And so everything that you hear is actually the budget as drawn up and presented by Elliot Spitzer. That, to this time, is the only budget that we actually have. So I'm going to turn it over to the Ways and Means staff, and what you will be hearing is the timeline for the budget, somewhat how the budget is put together, and then when we get to the content of the budget, keep in mind that is the governor's budget.
Thank you, Assemblyman. As the Assemblyman said, you could talk for a long time about the state budget process, but I'm going to try and do very brief, very quickly, both an overview of big numbers for the executive proposal, Governor Spitzer's proposal. We'll go through a timeline. I'm going to jump to some subject matters that I'm responsible for, and then Ed and Lauren will follow up from there. If you turn to page 2, if you would like, on your chart, the executive budget proposes spending slightly more than $120 billion. That's a 6.3% increase from last year's budget. That chart on page 2 makes a very simple display of year-to-year increases for general fund and then other state funds. You'll see in the second column a figure of $53.262 billion for general fund dollars. Those are your tax dollars. That column right there is tax dollars. That is the governor's proposed spending, primarily income tax. And below that, you'll see a state fund line. That number is the general fund plus additional dedicated revenues that state agencies collect, such as fees and surcharges. Then again, you go one more line. That figure, the proposed figure, is $83.5 billion. If you keep adding money onto that, after that, you add the federal funds in, and at the bottom line, you get to your $120 billion in proposed spending. The largest items or areas of spending in the budget include $7 billion in increase in school aid over the next 4 years, expanded property tax relief totaling $6 billion by 2010, increased Child Health Plus to capture an additional 400,000 uninsured New York State children, $250 million to lower state debt, $175 million for a new rainy day fund. And we've just chosen a few select ones that are new and they're on everyone's mind. The governor has proposed $300 million for its capital, this is bonded money, for International Computer Chip Research and Development Center. This was sort of a vague $300 million lump that was in the budget, and now that we have done some analysis and we're learning a few more things, we understand that there is in fact a company that the former administration was supporting, and this is a continuation of that commitment, and I'm afraid while there's been a lot of digging around, there's no agreement, still discussions, and we really don't know what the final result of that will be. There's another $300 million loan for the Investment and Job Creation Act of 2007. This is a program that ESDC will administer for projects selected at its discretion and approved by a new board, the new Investment and Job Creation Capital Approval Board. The interesting part about this is, if you have some understanding of our process in Albany, there's no PACB approval on that. It's the Public Authorities Control Board that often will approve capital bonded programs before they go out. Finally, the Stem Cell Innovation Fund. The governor has proposed a $2.1 billion program. This is $1.5 billion in bonded money and another commitment of $600 million over a 10-year period. It's significant. It is a proposal. It must be voted on by the public. He has asked that that vote take place by November of 2008. That's well over a year away. And during that period of time, members of both houses will be getting a lot of, I'm sure, public input on the stem cell proposal. There are a multitude of states doing this right now. This is New York State's foray into this. There are a number of, we've included some details on this, but in a nutshell, it will be $150 million per year plus general fund money to make a total of $200 million per year for a total of 10 years to go towards either stem cell research or emerging technologies. And those, while they've sort of been defined, are something that again, members and the governor will continue to discuss as to what that includes. Oh, and a final note on that. The governor's proposal also restricts higher education. Higher education is actually in great shape this year. There are not a ton of highlights, which standing in a college campus is probably a good thing to be able to say. There are a few issues that I thought I'd bring up. There is a $100 community college aid increase, which should help to eliminate or minimize tuition increases in community colleges. There is a small TAP reform proposal. That's the elimination of the use for the ABT test, the ability to benefit test, for the tuition assistance program, as we know as TAP, which is a significant program, about $850 million here in New York State, the largest in the country. That TAP reform proposal would change that slightly, but it only affects proprietary schools. Finally, public safety. We have news hot off the press today. This morning, late in the morning, there was an agreement on civil confinement for sex offenders, and there was an announcement soon after the agreement. The governor and the four legislative leaders announced the agreement. I'm going to go over some quick highlights. We actually, because we were on the road, were able to get all the details that we wanted because we were getting here and traveling, and we weren't needing some of the things that we wanted to. There's been a lot of debate over civil confinement over the years. The agreement is that we will be housing sexual predators on mental health facilities. There will be money to support the facilities on those mental health facilities. There will be a process, a review process by a board of doctors before an inmate is finished with his time at a DOCS facility, a prison. 6 months before being released, there will be a review process, first by a panel, then ultimately a judge having to make a decision as to whether that individual should be civilly committed because of sexual offenses, can be released under strict supervision or no supervision at all. And finally, another point in public safety is the announcement of the governor's commission to study and recommend the closure of the state correctional facilities. We have about 70 facilities here in New York State. We house about 63,000 plus inmates. There's been some discussion about the number of beds that are free and whether operating all of those facilities is appropriate. It will be, again, the members and the governor discussing the significance of that, and the commission will be coming up with recommendations, and when those recommendations are out, whatever they may be.
Highlighting, starting with the aid to localities section, it's on page 6. Aid and incentive for municipalities, it's called AIM aid. This is aid that is provided to municipalities, cities, towns, and villages, and it's for day-to-day operations. It's up to the municipality's discretion as to what their priorities are, what their needs are, and this aid can go towards that. The governor makes numerous changes in this aid category this year. His goal is basically to take away the traditional AIM funding that's provided to the wealthiest communities in the state and to target the increases of the aid to the financially distressed municipalities throughout the state. In doing so, he decreases AIM funding from year to year by $279.7 million. He does provide $50 million in that net number for fiscally distressed municipalities, and they will have ranges, an increase in municipal aid from 5 to 90%, depending on certain criteria that they need to meet to be eligible for it. If they receive this funding, the money needs to be used towards property tax reductions, local efficiency, economic development, or infrastructure improvements. Over last year's amount of the increase, 551 is being provided to upstate schools, 105 is being provided to the Big 5 city school districts. That includes, 3 of the Big 5, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester. The other 2 for the Big 5 are New York City and Yonkers. He's providing $639 million for New York City, and he's providing $112 million for debt service on school construction, which was a new program created last year. It's called the CEL. State aid in general, for those of you who don't know, is
the budget, because we have people in the audience who are clearly here to hear about the education component, and the numbers can be somewhat tricky. Where the governor proposed a $7 billion increase in spending over 5 years, only a little over $4 billion of that is an actual increase in the foundation aid. The rest was all cost-driven aid, which the school districts would have gotten anyway. So it sounds a whole lot better to say I'm going to increase spending by $7 billion, but in fact is only an increase of $4 billion over the 5 years. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can see the overwhelming amount of money is going to New York City and the other cities that have educational problems. And of course, if you're in that city, you think that's a very good thing. But what was pointed out during the educational hearings is the following. There are 700 school districts in New York State. About 303 school districts will receive the minimum of 3% growth per year over the next 5 years. Education inflation is running at the rate of 8% per year. That is a statistic that came from Richard Mills, the Commissioner of Education, during those hearings. So what does it mean? It means over the next 5 years, 303 school districts will be getting a 3% increase in school aid, while their average cost of operation will be going up approximately 8%. And as Senator Saland pointed out, that means in a relatively short time, these 303 school districts will all end up on contingency budgets because the people who are going to be asked to pay through school property tax have already indicated they can't afford to keep paying. In Dutchess County, as you know, last year we had, I believe, 11 out of 13 school budgets failed on the first vote. Was it 9? And it was a strange thing. Dutchess County was different than the rest of the state. The year before, 85% of school budgets were adopted on the first time around. This year, 89% were. But in school districts like those in Dutchess, where we receive a minimum or a less amount of state aid than some of the other schools, and the weight falls heavily on the school property taxpayer, this is not going to work. And even Commissioner Mills said he couldn't quite guarantee that, number one, the money would continue coming for 5 years, but the commissioner certainly understood that the $7 billion is really the $7 billion is really $4 billion, and it's going to create significant hardship for at least 303 school districts in New York State. So the money, somehow or other, it sounds better than it really is. The other thing is that when the governor's budget is based on the regent's attempt to find out what it costs to educate a child in a successful school, it then became a challenge to extrapolate that out to, well, what does it cost to educate a child in an unsuccessful school? Well, they didn't use that parameter. They just decided this is how much money in a successful school, and you notice they're not going to be getting the money. So, from the statement, Richard Godfrey, who is, he's a good friend of mine, and so when I tell you he is a extremely liberal socialist Democrat, and he would not at all be offended by that. At the education hearing, he made the following observation. He said, the governor said that in the area of health, we are spending too much money, we're getting terrible outcomes, and so we're going to spend less. In the area of education, the governor said, we're spending too much money, we're getting terrible outcomes, so we'll spend more. Now, that's the same governor, 2 different days, the same lead-up led to a different conclusion. I'm not sure we should be spending maybe more in both categories, but education clearly is something that everyone's concerned about, and if we don't give relief to the school property taxpayers, we're going to have some very serious problems. The other thing is, the governor talks about a $1.5 billion increase in STAR aid in his first year. That's really $600,000 because the governor failed to mention the $900 million that was given out in STAR rebate checks at the end of the last year. So there's actually only going to be a $600 million increase in STAR aid in his first year over the previous year, which may very much be insignificant. So it's not that anyone is lying, it's just that everyone uses the statistics to put the best face on what it is that they're trying to propose. The real question is, and this goes back to, and I just want to put the budget in its perspective so that while we're talking about these numbers and these numbers seem large, the state of California has twice the population of New York State. They have every problem conceivable that New York State has. They have a large immigrant population, both legal and illegal. They certainly have as many poor. They have exactly twice the Medicaid-eligible population that New York State has. In spite of that, their budget is less than 50% larger than ours. That would sort of imply we may be spending too much money. No one has ever said we gave them too much money. Everyone, in fact, says you didn't give us enough money. But keep in mind that California is not disappearing out of the country. It is functioning, and their budget, with twice the number of people that we have in New York, is less than 50% larger than ours. Another way to think about it is the New York State budget is the 27th largest budget in the world. We are surpassed by the state of California, and we are surpassed by the United States as a whole and 24 other countries in the world. So when we think about New York State budget, which currently spends money from all sources, $43 billion on education K through 12. We spend more per capita per child than any state. And again, since we're talking about education, what did I say before? It was 45%? 64% of students graduate from high school in New York State. Only 64% graduate. Now, that doesn't include the kids who are sent to other programs, so we don't have to count them. But only 64% of kids who go to high school graduate. But only 45% of all of the kids that go to high school graduate with a Regents diploma. Only 45% of all the kids who go to high school graduate with a Regents diploma, in spite of the fact that we spend more than any state on education. And so, the quantity that we have up in Albany, right, is, well, what is the connection between how much we spend and what we get? In fact, in Dutchess County, the school district that spends the most amount of money per child is the city of Poughkeepsie, and they have the worst outcome. So it's more than money, and that's why we're going to hear some very interesting things about what the governor is proposing when schools don't do very well. I think it somewhat misses the mark and puts the blame on everyone but the parents. But clearly, we're spending a whole lot of money on education. And again, the question you have to ask is, what are we getting for that money other than the fear that we're going to be driven out of our homes? So that puts the $7 billion in the proper perspective. It puts the increases in STAR in the proper perspective. It puts foundation aid in the proper perspective. It sounds like a lot of money, but when you really compare it to what we're already doing and realize that $3 billion was cost-driven aid, what does that mean? You build a building, we promised you if you build a building, we pay a certain percentage of it. Well, you built the building, now we have to pay for it. That's where the $3 billion increase comes from. The $4 billion is new voluntary money, but we were putting money in the budget on an annual basis equal to that over the last 4 years. We were already doing that. I just wanted to interrupt so that, just for the heck of it.
And that was the comedic relief.
Moving on to accountability. The governor proposes a lot of measures to increase school accountability, school district accountability. One of the biggest pieces is that in that foundation aid category, if a school district is getting an increase of 10%, of $15 million, or is receiving a supplemental education improvement plan, which the only school district in the state receiving that is the city of Yonkers, they have to agree to a new contract of excellence. What that means is that the commissioner is going to set up a menu of items that the school district can use those funds for. The ones that the governor highlights that he would like the commissioner to include in that menu would be using that money for class size reduction, students' time on task, teacher quality initiatives, middle school and high school restructuring, and full-day kindergarten. This proposal eliminates the district's ability to spend that additional state aid at their own discretion and what they see fit. Furthermore, the governor proposes to develop a school leadership report card and a separate school progress report card to assist school boards of education, the state and the public in assessing the performance of school leaders, including superintendent, principals, and schools that they lead. It is stated in the budget bills that if a school is failing over a set period of time, 4 years, that this would allow the state to remove superintendents and or principals from their posts if that's if they're found to be directly liable for those failing schools. Moving on to universal pre-kindergarten, it's the governor's proposal to have all schools offer, or all child be available to have UPK over the next 4 years. He provides an additional $99 million for a total of $395 million for the universal pre-kindergarten program. He puts this into the foundation formula, so he uses similar criteria that creates the foundation formula to distribute aid for universal pre-K. So the amount a school district can receive for this program would range from $250 per child all the way up to $5,750 per child based on the district. On the school aid runs that were provided with the executive budget proposal, universal pre-kindergarten there was funding provided to every school district whether or not they offer universal pre-kindergarten or not. Therefore, for school districts that are not and don't plan on it, that money is really not there for them.
It's important to note that pre-kindergarten isn't a free grant from the state, and that's why every school district doesn't do it. First, you need to have the classroom space, but more importantly, you have to pay for part of the program. So it's not as if the state is giving you pre-kindergarten. The state is offering you a partial payment for each student in the pre-kindergarten program. And so many schools elect not to use the money at all. And what that really means is that of the $4 billion in foundation aid, you will see hundreds of millions of dollars, and over the 4-year period, probably close to $1 billion in money that will never be spent because school districts, just like they have in the past, because we've offered this program in the past, do not take up the offer. And so that's another way of looking at the increase in aid. Some of it is bogus. We're offering you a program that you wouldn't possibly use, but we put the money in the budget. And when you decide not to use it, we're still going to claim we offered it. It just isn't going to be spent. And that aid in the past was not passed on to other programs. In other words, if you decide you do not want pre-kindergarten, you do not get to use that money to buy computers or to advance your science program. That is money that simply the state didn't give you, you didn't take, it wasn't spent, but it still looks like the state offered over $4 billion in 5 years on foundation aid. So be careful about, again, it's some of the things sound better than they really are, and we went through this exact same scenario, right, in a budget about 5 or 6 years ago, where there was $500 million put in for pre-kindergarten, And when all was said and done, less than $150 million was spent. So the state could claim it had offered $350 more than was actually being offered, because that money suddenly disappeared back into the general fund of the state and was not used for education. So you have to really delve into some of these numbers, and you find out it's not really as real as it sounds. And if the foundation aid that went to make up your 3% increase this year included pre-kindergarten money and you don't use it, you in fact may be getting only a 2.5% increase in funding, and you're still going to face your 8% increase in inflation, because that's been the standard whether you didn't have pre-kindergarten before. So that makes the disparity even greater and the pressure on the homeowner even worse, and the potential for going into contingency even higher.
Assemblyman, I just wanted to, there are two areas of this budget that concern me the most, and I would just offer that this is one of them. We know in the education world that there really is not much more important than educating and getting to the children when they are youngest. And that early intervention and universal pre-K and kindergarten, if offered in a comprehensive and aggressive way, can move a child from perhaps being one that's going to spend his or her entire life being challenged throughout their educational career, and perhaps their entire lives, to a child that can excel. And universal pre-K, in my opinion, is not something that you dangle out there for show. If we're going to invest in this kind of education, early intervention especially, and I consider universal pre-K as a method of early intervention, we ought to do it appropriately. So either we ought to fund it and give the school districts the ability either to contract with other partners to provide services, give them the building aid that they need, or we ought not pretend as if it's really there. And the reason that I think to drive home this one point, one of the school districts in my district can opt into the universal pre-K program. If they do so, they will receive $7,500. I have a 2.5-year-old, and I can assure you that $7,500 is not going to cover much of her first year of life, let alone an entire education for a school district in the area of pre-kindergarten. So I think that what the Assemblyman spoke about is important. There are a lot of good ideas, but if we're not going to fund them, I don't think we should have people think that we're providing them a service we're not. And this is, I think, an area of major concern for all of us.
We had a constituent call up one time and complained bitterly about the Wappinger School District's failure to accept this state grant. We had to explain it wasn't a grant at all. And Wappinger would have had to spend a whole lot more money than they were getting from the state to do it. And they elected to save the taxpayers' money rather than spend some additional state money. And so again, if you don't know all of the facts, and we can't possibly read those 4 volumes, but the staff from Ways and Means is giving you an excellent overview, but I think it just has to be peppered with a few other comments so that the reality of what's happening is given along with what the numbers are supposedly claiming.
I'm going to proceed on to page 12 and go on to full-day full-day kindergarten. Kindergarten in New York is not mandated. School districts are able to offer no kindergarten program, a half-day kindergarten program, or a full-day kindergarten program. The state provides aid based on what the school district offers. What the governor is proposing is that he would like by 2010-11 school year that all high-needs school districts offer a full-day kindergarten program. He is providing $2 million in his proposed budget for grants to investigate high-needs and low-performing school districts and the feasibility of offering full-day K in all of those school districts. Similar to the universal pre-K, I'll just comment that this is placing an unfunded mandate on the state's highest needed and lowest performing school districts by requiring them to offer full-day kindergarten program. Even though the state will be providing aid to those school districts, there will still be a local portion that needs to be raised, and also a lot of school districts have trouble with classroom space for kindergarten. Moving on to special education. Special education currently is funded in 2 categories: public excess cost aid and private excess cost aid. Public access cost aid is when a district provides a special education student education through a public setting, private is through a private setting. What the governor is proposing to do is take the portion of the public excess cost aid and roll that into the foundation aid formula. By doing that, districts will receive their traditional, at this point, level public excess cost aid in the foundation formula. What happens in out years is if the number of special education students within that district increases, the foundation aid will monitor that and will increase. Where there becomes somewhat of a problem is that if the special education students in that district decrease, the foundation formula will not decrease accordingly moving forward. Therefore, it does provide, similar to what's now happening, it does provide school districts an incentive to classify children as special education students.
We're going to be creating a new subcommittee in Albany, which is a subcommittee on special education. And it is anticipated that in addition to being the ranker on election law, which I know nothing about, but I do know a lot about higher education, I will be the ranker on the committee, the subcommittee on special education. This particular component of the budget bothers me a great deal because what this does is it rewards schools for providing less special education program. The school will get to keep the money, even if they take the kids out of the special settings that they were in and put them into a mainstream classroom. There they can claim they put an aide in the classroom that would satisfy the need, and the school will continue to get the money that it used to get for special ed. I personally believe that if a student is classified and is supposed to get special programs, that the child should get special programs, especially if the state is paying for it. But it's our understanding that, again, the child can be put into be mainstreamed in the classroom. They can throw an aide in, and the school will still get a certain amount. We'll get actually the same amount of money it was getting for special education. Someone's going to be cheated. The child who needs that special service will be cheated, and the other children in the classroom clearly will be disrupted by having this whole new arrangement going on within their classroom, will be not able to get the education that they wanted. And in fact, the state is trying to make an effort to discourage spending on special ed, and schools that go over a certain limit will be monitored and have to sort of explain why their special ed levels are as high as they are. It creates a problem. There are some kids who truly need the services, and as Assemblyman Molinaro pointed out, early intervention is critically important. Well, early intervention isn't just age 3 or age 4 or age 2. Early intervention can very well be age 5, 6, and 7. So by the time the child gets to high school, they could actually read, which is not a bad thing. We'd certainly like our students to be able to read the diploma they got. But if you don't provide that level of service, and it also would impact something like BOCES. If the schools now can mainstream their own kids, but still get the same money as if they were sending them to the special programs at BOCES or to the special programs within their own school, you know, those programs will slowly disappear.
Just one more note on special education. The high-cost public excess cost aid and the private excess cost aid is still funded separately outside the foundation formula as they currently are. Moving on to charter schools, the governor, we reached a cap on charter schools back in fall of 2006. The governor is proposing to increase that cap to 250 from the current 100. He also identifies 5 school districts which he provides transitional aid to, who have who he perceives are having a large impact due to charter schools, negative impact on the home district. Quickly, just on capital and building aid, he's providing $1.6 billion for building aid. That's an increase of $23 million, and he's also paying off the debt service on the Excel program that we enacted, that I described earlier. We're going to move on from education, and we're going to go to property tax relief. That's on page 18. The Governor's Property Tax Relief Program he calls Middle Class Star. The first part of his plan would benefit Basic Star recipients. Those Basic Star recipients with incomes at or below the statewide median income. This amount is adjusted for downstate regions. So $60,000 for upstate, $80,000 for New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties. Anyone with those incomes or below get an 80% increase in their exemption amount for their star exemption. Between that bottom, so it's 60 or 80 depending where you live, to double that, so 120 or 160, it's a sliding scale on the increased percentage in your exemption. Once you hit that double point, from there up into 235,000, you receive a 30% increase in your exemption. Anyone with household incomes above 235,000 do not receive a star exemption under this plan. Homeowners will be required to file an application with the Department of Taxation and Finance to Taxation and Finance will then match their household incomes with their property so that the assessors and the Office of Real Property Tax Service can calculate their appropriate star savings. The Enhanced Star program is for senior citizens who currently have household incomes at or below $67,850. They would receive an increase in their exemption of 30%. Their current exemption is $56,800. This would be increased to $73,800. For New York City residents, they get a personal income tax credit for their star. We would increase that for married individuals filing jointly from $230 to $300, and for all others from $115 to $150. An analysis of this, I think there's a few really important pieces to point out in his plan. The first would be that the current STAR program is provided for $3.6 billion. The governor claims that his new STAR program will add an additional $1.5 billion this year, $2 billion next year, and $2.5 billion the following year. What Mr. Miller had described before is that this, if you look at the second bullet on page 19, that this isn't necessarily true. He's eliminating the rebate checks that were provided last year to all homeowners. He's also eliminating the personal income tax credit that was provided last year if money was not provided for the rebate checks. So the rebate check program will be completely eliminated. That's worth $675 million. So the true value of the governor's real property tax plan is $825 million.
It's not just the dollar amount that bothers some of us. Clearly, when the state sends money directly to the school districts, and I'm a firm believer in the school districts getting the appropriate amount of money that they need, because I truly believe education is incredibly important, and that's why I serve on the education committee. But there's always been that lingering question in the back of many legislators' minds that when money goes directly from the state to the school district on behalf of the taxpayer, whether it's a pass-through, the taxpayer never sees it, and it goes directly to the school. The schools just might have a great tendency to spend that money. And we believe that if the money went directly to the homeowner, so the homeowner actually saw the size of the bill that they got, so you won't even see that. If your tax is $1,000 and we send $300 to the school district on your behalf, you get a $700 bill, may not seem that big. But if you got the full $1,000 bill, and we sent you the $300 check, chances are you'd want to hang on to that $300 and not simply give it to your school district. So there might be, and it's not that we want to set up a problem with school districts. We would like to find a better funding system for our schools, a better funding system than using property, a better funding system than having the state trying to make every odd-shaped peg fit in the same hole. And in fact, and Frank, you'll enjoy this, that I actually did advance at one of our meetings the idea of having the state collect all of the tax from businesses and redistribute it to school districts so that there would be some level playing field between those school districts that had huge numbers of commercial properties in them compared to school districts that have none at all. So STAR is a major problem, and no one really loves it. I mean, we thought that everyone would absolutely love it, and anyone who voted against it would lose an election. But we're finding out that people, they didn't love the rebate checks, they didn't love STAR, they're looking for a far better solution, and so this is just more of the same, and we're going to have to sharpen our pencils and sharpen our minds and come up with something completely different. But STAR, for whatever, and a number of reasons, is not the cure-all for the problems of the taxpayer in the area of education.
I did put it in the Assembly. My Republicans do have a plan that was approved by the entire conference. I put some information there. Part of the plan has to do with the rebate checks at this point. Again, this is all up for discussion and for negotiation. But it would triple the rebate checks this current year and quadruple them next year. In addition to that, it would give voters a say in what the local tax rate would be. It would let them, through a petition and referendum, decide if they want to limit the tax rate. We would also set up a commission to investigate property taxes and look for alternatives. And again, as Mr. Miller said, it would provide the savings directly to the homeowner rather than a pass-through. If you look at page 20, it's just a comparison. I gave an average STAR savings by county under the governor's proposal and the Assembly Republican proposal. And our proposal in the current year is worth $2.5 million versus the, billion versus the governor's $825 million. So you can see that it is, it does provide more savings because of the increase in the proposal. Finally,
I might as well just say something, just to change the kind of feelings. First of all, let me just say thank you to Marist College for allowing us to be here today. Thank you to my colleagues here, to Miller, to Mark, to Greg Wall, Mark, and Greg, our freshman members. And I have to tell you something, they're phenomenal. They're doing a great job of all English and just a chat in the city of Yonkers, in the scenic city of Yonkers, and which is the gateway to the Hudson Valley. So that's why we're going to come up here today to participate. And we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I'd like to build a chat. Just on the STAR program. Dr. Miller and I remain on the ground floor when STAR was first created. And when we first created the program, it came from the Assembly Republicans, and what we wanted to do was send checks to the property taxpayer. The reason we wanted to do that was because as we continue to increase aid to education to our municipalities, to our localities, for some reason, they would continue to increase their spending at exactly the same rate. So we wanted to put the accountability where the accountability belongs. We wanted to give the rebate check to the already overburdened property taxpayer so that they have their check in their hand, so that when the school district decided to increase their spending, they were held accountable to the voters because of what they were doing, rather than, just to give you an idea, because Yonkers is a little bit of a different situation. When we were doing this STAR property tax reduction, I had a councilman say to a homeowner, don't worry about the property taxes going up $50 because you know what, the STAR tax reduction is $850, so you're really still going to get a $400 reduction. Hopefully my math is right, but you're still going to get a reduction. So, did I really miss that? So, and what made me angry about that was that here they were sealing the STAR. They were telling you, as a taxpayer, don't worry about it, you still get a reduction, and taking the dollars that was meant for you out of your pocket. And you know what? We should send you a check. And then you decide if you're going to send it to the school district. And
And that's what we've been saying, that's what we've been fighting for all along. At the end of the day, I'm not sure if that will prevail, but that's what we've been trying to do. Give you the ability to make that choice. So again, thank you for having us here. It's really important that we hear your views, and it's really important that we get to listen. And I also say thank you to our staff, because to be here traveling all across New York State, it's a tough time of year for us, but it's much appreciated. So thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to just move on to my last section, and then I'll pass off to Ed. On page 22, I'm going to just talk a little bit about taxes in general and the surplus. The governor, each year, as one of these budget bills, there's an entire bill that's dedicated to just revenues, which is the tax side of the budget. All we've talked about at this point, besides the property tax reform, has been the spending side. So this is the side where all the money comes in. The governor's revenue bill does two things. It has a bulk of tax increases, and then it does have some tax decreases. The tax increases the governor categorizes as tax loophole closures. There's 18 of them contained in the revenue bill. These basically increase state business taxes in 18 different ways to businesses across the state. The business taxes increases will generate an extra $512 million in revenue this year for the 07-08 fiscal year, and $624 million next year in the 08-09 state fiscal year. The governor does not provide any business tax reliefs as a result of these taxable closures. He does provide two tax decreases. He establishes a tuition personal income tax deduction for taxpayers who pay tuition to public or non-public schools for their children. The deduction is equal to the amount of tuition paid up to $1,000 per dependent per child for those taxpayers who have incomes under $125,000. This would save these taxpayers $25 million annually. He also provides $4 million this year, $8 million next year for the low-income housing tax credit. To move on to the surplus.
Can you, I'm sorry, do you want to just add on the issue of the tax loopholes there? I don't remember in how many cases, but in certain instances they're decoupled from what are true tax rates that the federal government offers.
Right. Not, out of the 18, 9 are aligning businesses with the federal government. So if they have to file a certain way under federal government law, they now have to file that same way under state law. 9 of them were results of audits by the tax department. So the tax department audited different businesses, different companies, and found areas where they were finding ways to kind of go around the tax law. And that's how the 18 were developed. The most famous one was actually a case that's been pretty publicized with Walmart. What Walmart was doing was they were setting up a subsidiary company to do all of their management. They then pay the subsidiary company to manage all of their employees, which they then, for all their management, and then they put in their stores. Walmart was taking that subsidiary as a write-off, as a deduction, because they were paying them for their management services. But it was a subset of Walmart, and then it was all the managers for Walmart. So all the money was staying within the same parent company of Walmart, but they were writing off the subsidiary as a deduction. That's an example of one of these loopholes.
You have to be very careful when you talk about closing those types of loopholes on business. People like businesses to pay taxes. The reality is businesses don't pay taxes. The customers of those businesses pay the tax. If we were to add a $1,000 tax to Walmart, Walmart is not going to take $1,000 out of its profit and say, well, we make less money this year because of taxes. They will say, well, we sell 1,000 items. If we add $1 to the value or to the cost of each item, we'll take $1,000 back. And they'll calculate how much additional money they need to pay the taxes on that new income. And when the day is over, they will have made more money, and the consumer will have paid more money. So, I mean, that's the reality of how businesses do business. They simply pass on all of the costs to their consumers. For certain businesses, it may not be significant to do certain things in New York State if in fact it's happening everywhere else. But if we increase the cost of doing business in New York State on certain businesses, they will not come here. And if they do not come here, we will not get any taxes from them at all, nor will we get the jobs that they will normally bring, nor would we get the taxes on the income earned by the people who would have had those jobs. So the fact that Assemblyman Molinaro pointed out a very interesting thing, 10 of these things are tied to state, to federal regulations. In fact, the feds are still going to allow some of these, just New York State's going to close them. The governor originally in the State of the State talked about being more business friendly. In fact, he talked about enticing businesses to come to New York State. That's what makes our economy grow. But if you provide no tax incentive and in fact increase the taxes on business, we may have just the opposite effect. On the other hand, we don't want to see anyone who should be paying taxes not paying them, because since we're going to spend the money anyway, it passes on to the non-business people to pay it. So we want to be as fair as we can. But if you remember, we kept increasing the taxes on cigarettes. Every year that we increased the taxes on cigarettes, we saw less revenue. And we saw less revenue because people found if they bought tobacco products in New Jersey or Connecticut or over the internet or from Indian nations vendors, they didn't have to pay the tax anyway. And so we had this great thing. We thought we would increase the tax, put it in the budget, spend it, and never see the money because it never came in because people found ways around it. So increasing taxes are it's a very tricky thing. I want to go back to one other thing that I should have said before, because we had representatives from the sheriff's office here, and we still have the new majority leader of the county legislature, Gary Cooper, here, and it has to do with, there was a reference to crime and empty beds in prisons, and the sense that crime rate was going down. In everything we do, we deal with averages. The average wealth of a community. Wow, if you're the guy who cleans the street in that community, and you find the average wealth in the community is, the average income is $200,000, and you're making $30,000. It doesn't help you that the average is $200,000. You're still making your $30,000. You can't afford to whatever. Well, that's true of crime as well. Crime in New York State has been decreasing. But it's an average. In Dutchess County, crime has been increasing. And in fact, we have seen a greater and greater demand for jail space because we have more and more people being arrested. And so the fact that there are empty beds in other places doesn't help us as far as the overcrowding in our own jail. We're seeing an increase. We would like Mike to have Yonkers build a wall across the railroad track so that the criminals don't quite get past Yonkers on the way up to Dutchess County, but that's what's happening. So again, average, we have an increase in the crime rate. We have
families from Yonkers.
we're finding a lot. In any case, what I'm saying is don't let the averages fool you that we don't have empty beds in our jail. In fact, we are renting spaces in other people's jails to house our inmates. And county government is an interesting concept. A bunch of people get together and they're living together and they may decide that's a village. And a bunch of people may live together, you have more people, and they find that's a town. And you can end up with a city. But counties are a totally arbitrary level of government created by the state. And in fact, in Connecticut, when the counties decided they didn't want to do what they were supposed to do, Connecticut eliminated the counties. So Connecticut no longer has counties. Counties are an arbitrary level of government created by the state. And in fact, it is the county's obligation under the creation of counties because it becomes the jurisdiction for criminal prosecution. The jurisdiction for your crime is the county in which you committed.